Games Workshop, good old James Workshop, who makes the miniatures that I love to paint, has just put out a new set of intellectual property guidelines. And this has some people worried, and it has some people up in arms. I've seen a meme page on Facebook worrying that this means that they won't be able to make or post memes anymore. We're going to do a specific little segment here. This is getting a bit into nerd stuff and IP law, which is extra nerd stuff. So, a little bit of personal background. I used to work in intellectual property, specifically in the music copyright industry. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a copyright lawyer. So please take this as slightly more informed layman's advice. Games Workshop, good old James Workshop, who makes the miniatures that I love to paint, has just put out a new set of intellectual property guidelines. And this has some people worried, and it has some people up in arms. I've seen a meme page on Facebook worrying that this means that they won't be able to make or post memes anymore. And I just wanted to go through the IP guidelines here, have a look at what it actually says, deconstruct it from an informed layman's point of view, and see what impact this might have for the Warhammer community and for the Games Workshop fan communities. So we'll zoom this in a bit so we can see it a little better. I know it's not perfect viewing size, but that'll have to do. So, intellectual property guidelines. Warhammer, beyond the tabletop. Games Workshop has been designing and selling miniatures and games for over 40 years. Our design studios have worked hard to create the unique settings and characters that are enjoyed by our fans all over the world. We love to see fans enjoying all things Warhammer. We also have a duty to preserve and protect our intellectual property rights. This is the only way we can ensure that Warhammer will be around forever. Our goal is to do this while continuing to support the passion and creativity of our fans. We will level with you. This is a difficult balancing act. We'll see if they've managed to pull off this balancing act. And when they say that they have a duty to protect their intellectual property rights, that's something that is factual under the way that copyright law currently works in our societies. So if a company has intellectual property on something and they don't protect it, they lose those IP rights, and people can freely use them. And it's if a company, as soon as a company becomes aware that a potential infringement is happening, if they don't take action, that inaction effectively legally means that they are ceding those copyrights. So, whatever exciting Warhammer hobby activities you're working on, we ask that you follow the below guidelines at all times. By doing so, we can all continue to enjoy all things Warhammer for a long time to come. These guidelines do not constitute formal approval or authorization of any fan content or waiver of our legal rights. We reserve the right to change these guidelines at any time. That's a pretty standard disclaimer. Fanfiction, hobby books and magazines. Individuals may write their own stories, hobby books and magazines based on our characters and settings, but these must not include text, artwork or imagery copied from any official Games Workshop material. That's pretty standard, pretty straightforward. Be non-commercial, with no money being received or paid. This includes all forms of fundraising activity and generation of any advertising revenue. Again, pretty fucking standard. Nothing out of the blue there. So you can make fan fiction, hobby books and magazines as long as you're not using official GW stuff, as long as you're not making money from it. The next one, must not be publicly distributed, which would be a problem, except for no-charge digital distribution. So, you can still write your fucking fan fiction, stick it up on archive of our own, and it'll be fine there. You don't have to worry. Make it clear that they are unofficial without using any Games Workshop logos and include the word unofficial prominently on the front cover. That's a little bit annoying, but it's a minor formatting issue. Say, There's a fan magazine, INQ28 or Inquisitor 28 mag, which is like does a whole bunch of awesome stuff. It just means they're going to have to put the word unofficial on their cover. Shouldn't be a huge imposition. And the final one here, not be prejudicial to the goodwill, reputation, or integrity of Games Workshop or its intellectual property. Now, these rules so these 5 points are repeated basically for fan artwork and for fan sites, though fan sites is just the 4. So that not be prejudicial to the goodwill, reputation, or integrity of Games Workshop or its intellectual property. That means if you're putting out, say, so this is for specifically fan fiction, hobby books, and magazines, this is something that lets them not be associated with political extremists or lets them say, hey, you're a fucking fascist. We don't want you putting out this magazine anymore because it is prejudicial to the goodwill, reputation, and integrity of Games Workshop or its intellectual property. That does seem like a reasonable clause. So fan artwork. Individuals may create their own artwork, drawings, and designs based on our characters and settings, but these must. Now, this is just the same as the fanfiction, hobby books, and magazines section, except this does technically mean that now no one can make paid commission artworks of Games Workshop characters, of Space Marines, of characters for your RPGs, anything like that. To me, that says all of that is verboten. That would also apply to anyone putting out such things via a Patreon, quite potentially. Now, we'll talk of the way that some people might be able to get around that, but we'll hold on to that for a little bit later. So fan sites. Again, basically the same thing. Individuals may create their own fan sites based on their characters and settings, but these must not include text, artwork, imagery, footage, or animation copied from Games Workshop material. Make it clear that they are unofficial without using Games Workshop logos. Not post or display rules or stats copied from any official Games Workshop material. Again, that is their copyrighted information. That is a reasonable thing for them to do. And not be prejudicial to the goodwill, reputation, or integrity of Games Workshop or its intellectual property. That's all pretty fine. Now, the underlying rights, please be aware that where fan content is created based on our settings and characters, Games Workshop retains ownership in respect of the underlying intellectual property rights in those worlds, and therefore such fan content cannot be sold or otherwise monetized. Now, this is the part here, infringements, where we start to get into a few problems that are probably going to have negative effects on the hobby and the supplementary industries that exist around Games Workshop. Now, a few of these are perfectly fine. So we have a zero tolerance policy in respect of infringements of our intellectual property rights. This includes counterfeit models. Our products must not be reproduced and sold. That's fair. Like, that's just them, like, recasting is already illegal. It's already copyright theft. They can't enforce it in China because China's a wild west when it comes to that stuff, but counterfeit models, perfectly fine. Next one is imitation models. This is where it gets a little bit trickier. So imitation models. Our products must not be imitated. Imitators produce models which copy heavily from Games Workshop's artwork, books, or products. There is a thriving market of third-party bits for custom conversions that are very clearly in the Games Workshop style. Some of these are cast in resin, some of these are provided in 3D as 3D files, and some of these are printable on shapeways. We're talking things like replacement orc heads that might have like little pickelhalbers is one that I've seen. It might include things like 3D printed Space Marine pauldrons with custom insignias from shapeways. These could all get caught up in this, as well as catching up imitation models and alternative models that a lot of people have been putting out. So there's people who've been putting out like alternative plague marines and noise marines from Chaos. These will get caught up by this. There are some Patreons that have been putting out like 3D file alternative ranges. This will get caught up by this. Recasting in 3D printing, this is basically just the same as counterfeit models. So our products must not be illegally recast or scanned, nor should digital designs of our products be illegally produced or distributed. Now, this doesn't cover personal designs and personal 3D printing. You can still, like, you can go into some CAD software, make up some conversion bits, like design your own custom vehicles and stuff and print those off. That's going to be fine. Like, that's hobbyist activity. That is protected under most jurisdictions that use copyright. That's not going to be a worry. But that is going to stop people from selling such files or distributing them commercially. Illegal downloads. Not controversial here. This is just our publications, audiobooks, and other material protected by copyright must not be illegally uploaded, shared, or distributed in any format. That's pretty standard. Unauthorized use of our trademarks. That's pretty standard as well. If you're using trademarks in an unauthorized fashion, you are pretending to be of another, like, the risk is you're presenting yourself as the company, and that can be damaging to the company. I'm going to skip one to get back to games and apps. So you must not create computer games or apps based on our characters and settings. These are only to be created under license from Games Workshop. That's perfectly reasonable. But this one here is going to cause a big problem and a lot of uproar in the community. Fan films and animations. Individuals must not create fan films or animations based on our settings and characters. These are only to be created under license from Games Workshop. Now, I suspect that they're going to have trouble enforcing this point, but they are probably going to try. So there have been a number of very successful and popular fan animations that have been produced that Games Workshop has then gone and bought the licensing for, and they'll be releasing under their Warhammer Plus app, which is like a streaming service plus an army builder and access to a backlog of White Dwarf magazines and stuff like that. But this means that we're not going to see much, if anything, in the way of these really kind of inventive, creative, beautiful fan creations that have honestly gotten a lot of people into and interested in the hobby. Things like Astartes or the animated Hell's Reach series that someone did. And these are big, like, popular works that people aren't going to be able to pursue without worry from strong legal action from Games Workshop. Now, as I said at the start of this, I'm just a layperson. If you're worried that your own projects are going to be impacted by any of this, please contact a copyright lawyer, talk to a legal professional, get actual advice. I am just a layperson with, admittedly, slightly higher than average understanding of copyright legislation, but I'm still not a professional in this field, or I'm still not a lawyer anyway. Now, there's a couple of extra things that I really wanted to talk about here. One of them is, so I mentioned earlier in the segment, a way that I think that some artists are going to be able to get around the restrictions on fan artwork. Now, all Western copyright jurisdictions have protection for parody, and some have protection for satire. Now, parody is when you are mocking the original work in some way or parodying it. A parody or a satire doesn't have to be funny. Parody is mockery, often by exaggerating its qualities. Now, 40K is already a very kind of highly exaggerated setting. Satire, I know protections for satire exist in Australia. They don't exist in America. I'm not certain if they exist in the European Union. But satire differs from parody. Satire is specifically making a political point. So you're using the base material to make a political point, and that protects it as satire in areas where there are satire protections, such as here in Australia. So there's one fan artist, specifically Bolter to Kokoro, who, because of the nature of their artworks, I think a lot of their stuff would be protected as parody. So let's just open this image in a new tab here. So here we can see, like, it's Space Marines and Imperial Guards and Sisters of Battle building a Space Marine snowman and being all cutesy. One can argue that this is parodic because it is over the top. It's kind of using the inherent traits of 40k to make a bit of a mockery of 40k. So there's arguably some leeway there. Again, I'm not a professional. If you are Bolter to Kokoro and you're watching this, first, I fucking love your artwork. Thank you so much for bringing so much joy to the community. And second, consult with a copyright lawyer. Don't take my word for it, please. I don't want you to get into trouble. The other thing that I want to address more specifically is people worrying about this negatively affecting meme making. It's not going to. Making memes falls under fair use, and it's a non-commercial activity. So even if you could argue that memes are somehow fan art, it will still fall under the non-commercial clauses, the non-commercial clause of their fan art guideline here. So yeah, that was just what I wanted to go over. I wanted to have a bit of a look at these new intellectual property guidelines and how it's going to affect the community, and see whether the worry was warranted. In some instances, yeah, I think it genuinely is. Oh, so that's another thing. So a great example of parody, so something that would fall under the parody protections, is if the Emperor had a text-to-speech device. So that's a fan-made YouTube series that is kind of very, very clearly parodic, very, very over the top. We'll have a little look here. If the Emperor had a text-to-speech device, we'll just pull up some of the images. But this is a series that's very worth watching. Some of the early episodes do have some kind of iffy humor, but it does get better over time. So Hyro, you believe, can't confirm that many of the parody music video makers on YouTube stopped making their videos because they weren't sufficiently parodying the original, but using as a basis for other humor. Yeah, so parody very specifically has to be mocking the original thing. So a lot of people think that parody music is just when you take something's existing musical structure and change the lyrics. That's not a parody, that's a rearrangement. And you need, like, the initial copyright is still in effect, and you need copyright permissions in order to do this. So the most successful and famous cover musician, or kind of parody cover musician of our time, is probably Weird Al Yankovic. And Weird Al understands copyright law, and he goes and properly licenses all of the things that he parodies, because he's not generally directly mocking or directly parodying the underlying work. He's using it to make a statement about something else, which, if it's political in nature, could arguably be satire, but Weird Al is operating in the US jurisdictions that doesn't have protection for satire. But even then, he still wants to, do right by the other artists, so he goes and licenses their works, and power to him for doing that. Mad respects, top props. Thank you for sitting through that somewhat dry conversation about IP law. Hopefully I managed to make it somewhat interesting and entertaining. I know it's not the usual thing that people cover on stream.